Hello and welcome back to another episode of Math with Sohn. Today we're going to be doing some special right triangles. So we have two different special right triangles. There are 45-degree special right triangles, and then there are 30, 60, 90 ones. So let's start off with a 45. If you have a 45-degree right triangle, if you have either one of the legs, because the legs are going to be the same, if they are 10, which I just made up the problem, if these are 10, the hypotenuse would be 10 square root of 2. So you multiply the legs by the square root of 2. So you take your leg and you multiply by the square root of 2, and that is what the hypotenuse is. If you have your hypotenuse divided by the square root of 2 would equal the leg. And that is the only two things you have to remember, other than maybe what's the hypotenuse and what's the leg. So here we have a leg. We multiply the leg by the square root of 2. So this is going to be 2 square root of 2 times the square root of 2, which makes 2 square roots of 4. Because square root of 2 times square root of 2 makes square root of 4. And then, what is the square root of 4, ladies and gentlemen? Well, the square root of 4 is 2. So 2 times 2 makes 4 for the hypotenuse. And now I also wanted this other part up here. Well, these are always the same. So this is going to be 2 radical 2, or 2 square root of 2. Perfect. No harm, no foul. Number 2, here we are provided the hypotenuse. Anytime you're provided the hypotenuse, you would need to divide by the square root of 2 for a 45-45 triangle, which makes this the answer for both of these. However, some of your teachers may not appreciate it being represented as a fraction. So anytime you are provided something like this, what you are allowed to do is multiply by 1. Anytime you can multiply by 1, and the number that you should multiply by is whatever is on the bottom of the radical. And if we do that, if you multiply everything by the square root of 2 over the square root of 2, square root of 2 times square root of 2 is still square root of 4. 4 times the square root of 2 is 4 square roots of 2. And the purpose of doing this is because the square root of 4 is 2. So you get 2, and we get 4 square root of 2 on the top. And what is 4 divided by 2? 4 divided by 2 makes this 2 square roots of 2. So that would be the more official answer for that. All right, let's do a few more. That gets a little confusing. Let's do a few more. Here we are provided a leg. Anytime you're provided a leg, just multiply by the square root of 2. You get 3 square root of 2. Square root of 2 makes square root of 4 over 2. What is the square root of 4, ladies and gentlemen? Square root of 4 is regular 2 divided by 2. 3 times 2 is 6. 6 divided by 2 makes 3, or you could think of it as the 2's canceling. All right? So we're going to do one more with a 45-degree triangle. It's going to be number 6 because it's a unique problem. See how here you're still provided the hypotenuse, and the hypotenuse this time is a radical. If you're provided the hypotenuse, you divide by the square root of 2. So we're going to need to take 2 square root of 6, divide by the square root of 2, to get 2 square root of, if they're in the radical, they can divide. So square root of 6 and square root of 2 can divide to make 2 square root of 3. Now this problem I don't have to do anything with because it's not a fraction. If it's not a fraction, you're not required to rationalize it. And in geometry, a lot of times your teacher may not ask you to. It depends on if you're in honors or not. Okay? Moving on to the 30, 60, 90 triangles. So 30, 60, 90 triangles, I'm going to draw a regular example for it. So here we have a little bit more of an issue. This is the 60-degree angle, and this is the 30. But I like to think of this as the short side. And I like to think of this as the long side. And I like to think of this as just the hypotenuse. Okay, so we have the short leg, we have the long leg, and then we have the hypotenuse, which is the longest leg. All right, so we're going to start with the short side. So if the short side is provided, then your life is easy. If the short side was, let's say, 5, then the long side is going to be 5, not square root of 2, but square root of 3. And then the hypotenuse is just going to be 10. Okay? So that means that the hypotenuse is just equal to 2 times the short side. And that means that the long side is equal to the short side times square root of 3, or square root of 3 times the short side. Okay? And then the short side is going to equal one of two things. You want to find the short side first. If you don't have the short side, you need to find that first. Find the short side first. The short side is either equal to the hypotenuse just divided by 2, not square root of 2, just 2, or it is equal to the long side divided by the square root of 3. Those are the keys that you would need to know to be able to do these problems, okay? So here, number one priority is find the short side. If we have 16, 16 is the hypotenuse, and I need to find the short side, that means that y, which is the short side is going to equal to the hypotenuse divided by 2, right there. So that's going to equal 8. So that means that the short side is 8. How do you go from the short side to the long side? You take your short and you multiply by the square root of 3, or you just write 8 square root of 3. Ba-bam. Done. Number 8. Here, what are we provided? Across from the 30 is the short side. It also visually is the short side, so this is the short side. How do we go from the short side to the hypotenuse? Well, you take your short side and you multiply by 2. So this is going to be 2 times 2, which is 4, or double the short. How do you go from the short side to the medium side or the long side? It would be 2 times the square root of 3. All right, let's do a few more on the back. All right, let's say here we got a harder problem on number 10. Because you're provided the hypotenuse, and the hypotenuse is ugly. It's 8 square root of 5. How do you go from the hypotenuse to the short? You divide by 2. So we take the hypotenuse and we divide by 2. So that's 8 square root of 5, and we divide by 2. If it's on the outside of the radical, you just divide the outside. So 8 is on the outside, 2 is on the outside. There is no radical. So 8 square root of 5 divided by 2 is just 4 square roots of 5, and that is the short side, which in this case is y. So this is going to be 4 square roots of 5. How do you go from the short side to the long side over here? You take your 4 square root of 5 and you multiply by the square root of 3. Remember that the long side is your short times the square root of 3. So we got 4 square roots of 5 times the square root of 3, which makes 4 square root of 15. Okay? Let's see if we can do a harder one. Number 11 looks like a harder one. Not much, but a little bit. This is the long side. You always want to find the short side first because you go from the long to the short to the hypotenuse, or from the hypotenuse to the short to the long, or from the short to both. So we're going to take the long side. If we need to go from long to short, remember that the long divided by the square root of 3 is equal to the short. So that means that we're going to have to do 5 square roots of 3 divided by the square root of 3 to get our short side. Now, in this case, I don't need to multiply by the square root of 3 and the square root of 3, because if you take 5 square roots of 3 and divide by the square root of 3, what's on the inside of the radical can divide by what's on the inside of the radical, which ends up just canceling. But if you don't want to do that, you get 5 times square root of 1, because, square root of 3 divided by square root of 3 is 1. Square root of 1 is 1. So that means that the short side is just 5, because the square root of 3 canceled. So if the short side is 5, how do we go from the short side to the hypotenuse? You just double it. So we got our two answers here. We got 5 for the short side, or y, and 10 for x. Okay? Let's do, let's try 13. Uh-oh, not a 40. It's a 45-45 triangle. We got to think back. How do we go from the hypotenuse to any of the legs? Because they're the same. You take your hypotenuse and don't divide by 2. You divide by the square root of 2. And just like the last problem, what's in the radical can cancel or divide, and you're just left with 8. Okay? All right. Let's do one more maybe. Let's do number 14. 14 looks like the last hardest problem that we have on here, besides maybe 15. We'll do 14 and 15. We got 12. This is the long side. How do you go from the long side to the short side? You divide by the square root of 3. That's going to be our short side. Okay? So without rationalizing it, we're going to take that and say it is 12 over the square root of 3. If your teacher doesn't want you to rationalize it, which gets the radical off the bottom, how could we go from here to the hypotenuse? You could just double it. Well, what is double 12 square roots of 3? 24 over the square root of 3. Now, let's say you can't keep the square root of 3 on the bottom. if you can remember correctly, you multiply by the square root of 3 and the square root of 3 to get it off the bottom, which leaves us with 12 radical 3 over the square root of 9. But what is the square root of 9? 3. And what is 12 divided by 3? 4 square roots of 3. So technically, this is 4 square root of 3. And technically, this would be 8 square root of 3 when you double the 4. Okay? Depends on what your teacher's requiring. We got one more. It's going to be 15. 15 is slightly hard only because you're given your hypotenuse, and we need to go from the hypotenuse to the short. Well, the short side is the hypotenuse divided by 2. And it doesn't really divide by 2. So we're just going to write 3 over 2 because a lot of these are written as fractions rather than 1.5. How do you go from the short side to the long side? You multiply by the square root of 3. And if that were the case, you can rewrite it as 3 square roots of 3 over 2. Notice how we're not worried about getting the 2 off the bottom because the 2 is not inside a radical. All right, that's going to do it for this one. Until next time, everybody, stay positive, and I will see y'all later. Bye.